A recent study found that over half of all U.S. workers are unhappy in their job. Over half. Think about that number. That's a crazy amount of people who are content to stay in jobs they hate for some silly reason. Like some unwritten rule that you've got to stay at a company for a certain amount of time or to look bad on a resume. Or maybe it's fear. Maybe it's the fear of if you go out and get another job, maybe it's going to be worse than the job you have right now. And so better just to stay put and deal with it because work is supposed to suck, right? This week's guest went a non-traditional route to ultimately finding a position he loves at a company he actually enjoys being a part of. And that is exactly what we are talking about in this week's episode. Hey, I want to welcome you to the Self-Made Web Designer Podcast. If you are new to the podcast, I want to say I'm glad that you're here. If you've been here for a while, let's do our traditional internet high five. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, I hope you air high-fived me at the same time, or I was air high-fiving myself, and that's no fun. Hey, I want to encourage you to take a second. If you haven't already, subscribe to the show, leave us a rating, leave us a comment, and invite some friends to listen along because it's always more fun to do things with friends. Our guest this week is the one and only Mr. Kyle Wai Lin. And Kyle has a bunch of different experiences doing a bunch of different things at different jobs in the tech world. He was a production assistant. He started his own agency, and he ultimately ended up landing a position as a creative director at a startup in Silicon Valley, doing a lot of awesome things in the tech industry. And Kyle shares with us all the things he learned from his journey of pivoting his career over and over again, reinventing himself, trying new things out, not settling for the status quo. And ultimately, he shows you how you can find a job that you love being able to get up and get out of bed to go to in the morning. It's a fantastic episode with a lot of good insight. Are you ready for Mr. Kyle Wai Lin? All right, here we go. Well, hey, Kyle, thanks so much for being on the Self-Made Web Designer Podcast.
Awesome. No, thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about who you are and the journey to where you were and how you got to where you are today.
Oh, man, that is a loaded question. I will try to start from the beginning, but it is not a linear path. I think I first started off in advertising. I was working in broadcast production, doing like print, web, TV spots, radio spots as a producer. I saw what they were doing, and I was going to all these shoots, and it was cool. And I'm like, man, like I want to work on like TV spots and like cool things and like print campaigns. So I went back to school and got a master's degree at VCU Brand Center. Great school, shout out to them. And that really set me on the path into advertising, design, and tech. 10 years later or more, rather, I've worked in and out of different tech companies, everything from Apple to Twitter. I've worked at, every single kind of big ad agency you can think of, mostly digital. So RGA, AKQA, and then a ton of big and small startups and ad agencies in between. Right now, and then after that, I created my own agency for about, it was like 2 or 3 years, which was quite a ride. And most recently, I took up a role as creative director at a fitness tech company called Tempo.
You've had quite the journey as far as your career and the path that you've taken to get to where you are now. So how would you say you found like the best fit for you, or have you found the best fit for you? And what are some things for people who have maybe not had that linear journey that most of us aspire to have? Like, what would you say would help them to figure out the path they should take or where they should end up?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. My wife tells me that I tend to make kind of poor decisions when it comes to jobs and careers. Or maybe jobs more so than careers. This is my own personal thing. My wife would not agree, but I would say, don't pick a job based on like a title or even what the company does, but rather the people that you're working with. And sometimes that'll lead you down really different paths that you probably wouldn't have taken otherwise. But I've done that. Sometimes I've found the right people. Other times I've found the absolute wrong people. But either way, it's like you learn even from the wrong people. Like you might even learn more from the wrong people than the right people. And then also just surround yourself with people that you want to be and lead yourself with values. So if you believe in something, like myself, I think I mentioned this to you before, diversity is a really big part of my platform. And I would never join a company. I would never even work with a client unless I felt that they shared that value.
Talk a little bit about that as far as, the people aspect. How do you figure out if you fit with somebody versus not fitting with somebody? And how do you do that just on the basis of like an interview? Because I think it's somewhat difficult to know like, oh yeah, me and this company are going to get along well. Like you might get in there and then a month from when they hired you, it's a nightmare. So what are some mile markers for you that have like showed you like, okay, this is great. This is a good fit for me?
I think you never know. Like you said, sometimes like a month into a job or a project, you'll hate yourself and hate your every decision you've ever made. But generally speaking, for me, and this is a personal thing, everybody's going to be a little bit different. I would say I always go by this kind of rule of thumb that I think of as can I sit next to this person on like a coast to coast airplane trip and like have a good talk, have fun, enjoy myself, sit peacefully, quietly, like, am I going to hate them and they're going to hate me? So that's like one kind of quick rule of thumb. And then the other bit is probably, I really like people that are able to talk casually, speak very casually about what they do versus people that feel like they have to overcompensate or use big words or use jargon or, like almost like competitive talking or competitive mansplaining. Like if I see that, I'll be like, no, this person is not right. The more casual you are about what you do, the more, as at least I see it, the more confidence you have in what you do. And it gives me confidence in you if you're that casual about it.
What I've found like a reoccurring theme on the podcast is how much those soft skills are so incredibly important to either having a business, owning your own company, or building a career in tech. So for those who have just devoted themselves to the hard skills, to the design aspects, to the book studies, to whatever, like what's a way that they can grow those soft skills so they are the kind of person that you would hope to sit next to you on a coast to coast trip?
Yeah, wow, that's a good one. I mean, the simple answer is just to be human. Like if you have friends, that's probably a good sign. If you don't have friends, maybe that's not a great sign. Maybe make some, and spend time with people outside of what you do for your like hard skill portion of your career. Family also, I think like if you have one, if you treat your family well, if this person treats their family well, that's also a good sign. Because nobody's going to treat you any better than they do their family. So if they either, if they say treat their family terribly, then that's probably a bad sign. Or the other thing too is if somebody, like if you're at a restaurant with somebody and you notice that and this is a little bit off topic, but they treat the waitress or busser poorly, you can assume that they're not gonna, this is just how they treat people that are doing anything for them, and that's just kind of a red flag. But in terms of developing your soft skills, I mean, man, like just be human, like do things outside of work, like a lot of things outside of work, go on trips, like travel the world, have a hobby that has nothing to do with what you do, you know, just things outside of your space. And I don't think they teach that in school. And it's something that you kind of learn and get more confident with over time. So it is challenging. I would say these days I do come across some folks that probably could use better soft skills, and even not just at the beginner level, but even in the sort of advanced stage. I definitely come across people that I'm like, man, like how have you made it this far? Or maybe you've made it this far because you were ruthless. And I don't know, like for me, that's not a value. ruthless. You can be sort of a good person and still make it a long way. I like to think, at least.
Yeah. And you've done a fair bit of probably teaching at the college level, from what I can remember. And you might have already kind of answered this question already, but what kind of things have you seen that have really helped students stand out, especially those who have gone on to be successful in their careers?
I would say the types of students that I think do the best are the ones that can figure out anything. Like, you throw something at them that they've never seen before, they didn't learn in class, and we haven't even talked about. But they come back and they're like, I figured it out, So this kind of can-do attitude, to just be able to sort things out themselves. I think any employer is going to look for that. And yes, you should be able to do your hard skill if they hire you for design, development, or whatever. But if you can't just figure out how to do X, Y, Z, that would be a red flag, I would say, for any employer.
I'm finding a lot of times when somebody comes to me for advice from self-made web designer, that there's just certain things that I can help them with and certain things that like I just can't help them with. Like, it has to be some type of internal motivation, some type of intrinsic value or skill set. And the question that I have been having is, can I help them with those things? Have I just not figured out how to explain it or how to coach somebody in the right direction? So has that been your experience as well? And have you maybe figured out the secret sauce of being able to get past those things that are kind of intrinsically necessary?
Like, I've found that sometimes it does take a certain personality type that cannot be taught. Like, for example, I started off my career as a producer, and I was not a great producer. Like, I was okay. I was pretty good. I figured stuff out. But ultimately, like, after, I think it was like 2.5 years of doing that, I said to myself, like, I am probably not the personality type for this. And I think it takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to say that and think that. And, in the same, I've seen students of mine from Miami Ad School, from General Assembly, who may have started off in a design class, may have started off in a creative class, and down the line they become a producer, or down the line they become an account person, an account executive, new business person, just strategist, something different than what they were planning on in school. And I think it just takes a lot of professional maturity and self-awareness to really know, if your personality like lands in a place where you can maneuver it into your, chosen career path. And I think it's okay to say, hey, like, maybe this isn't for me. I can still use these skills, but I should probably be doing this other thing that I'm maybe better suited for.
Let's chat a little bit, because you've worked for some big companies, you work for small companies, you've had your own companies. And I think a lot of times, like, there's kind of two paths that people have when they're thinking of having a design or tech career. And that's either I'm going to work for, Apple or Google or whatever, or I'm going to start my own agency or have my own startup, And so you've kind of seen success of both of those things and have essentially decided, like, I'm going to do something else. So maybe talk about the ups and downs of that and what ultimately led you to decide to be where you are right now.
Yeah, well, we could talk all day about that one, man. Like, I've seen success and failure at big and small places, and sometimes the success had to do with me and my own, approach to it. Sometimes it's had to do with outside forces that are beyond my control. And ultimately, man, like, having worked at Apple, having worked at Twitter, having worked at big agencies, I'm not, and this is a very personal thing, like, it's just not really, it doesn't really motivate me to be, a cog in the wheel, even at these incredible companies. Some people love that, and I think there's a lot of value to that. Like, people talk about it when it comes to Apple, and they kind of use the analogy of, like, Apple is just full of these samurais that, like, hone their craft, like, to this very specific point, and they just do this one thing so extremely well. And everybody at Apple, I would say, is like that. And a lot of these big tech companies also. And then there are people like me who prefer to sort of be a bit more of a generalist, who want to have their hands in different pots, who enjoy, figuring things out and not really having a process or system, like having to create one along the way. And for me, that's true creativity. And that's kind of what gets me excited in the morning. Not going to lie. It also is probably a lot more tiring than fitting into one of these big companies where there's a lot of process, procedure, and resources. But for me, like when you have, the less resources you have, the more constraints you have, the more interesting things get. So that led me to, creating my own agency and just working for small clients and kind of figuring it out. And that was actually a lot more rewarding than working on a big campaign or working on a big website because, I had to just figure it out. And then where I'm at right now, I work for a fitness tech company called Tempo. And when I joined the company, I think I was like maybe the 15th employee, so it was still like a really small early stage startup, Series A. We were just kind of figuring it out. We hadn't even had a product out and available to the public. We hadn't even had a website, or we had like a landing page, not a website up. And in over the past 6 months, probably in large part because of quarantine, we blew up. Series B funding. We I don't even know, quadrupled in size. Like we're probably like 70 people now, and it's becoming like a pretty safe to say like a mid-sized company. And it's still really exciting. It's still crazy. Every day is a roller coaster. Every week to week, I do not know what's happening sometimes, or things change so quickly. And for me, I love that kind of challenge because it just makes it interesting, yeah. So big companies for some people, for me, small companies are just more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that, and it just highlights the fact that it's so important to know yourself, and I think you probably have a better insight into that because you've taken the risk and gone, you know what, I'm not happy here, and so I'm just going to go ahead and leave. And I know there's this kind of standard with companies of like, all right, you've got to stay for this much amount of time, and you've got to do this kind of thing. But it sounds like you haven't necessarily bought into that idea. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Definitely not. I'm not into it. Like there's this kind of, I don't know what it is, like standard in everyone's mind, and probably in a lot of recruiters' mind, probably for good reason, that people need to stay 1 or 2 years or 10 years at a company in order to have, made an impact or gotten the best at it or whatever. But for me, it's like if I am at a company for 6 months and I'm like, yeah, these people do not align with my values, like I'm not into this, I'm out. Or alternatively, God, like if I don't align with their values and it's pretty obvious, like they'll kick me out. And that's definitely happened too. And I think you gotta just have self-awareness and know that that's okay. Like better, you spend too much time at a job to allow it to like, suck your values from you, or having to, be opposed to what you believe in.
And you mentioned, the generalists versus people who get really specific in their skill. And, like I know people from Amazon who the only thing they do is develop for the buy now button, and like some people love that idea. I can't imagine a world where I could show up every day to work and work on a button for the rest of my life, So, and it's almost like there's this kind of thought process in popular, culture when it comes to tech companies that the more specific you get on your skill set, the more valuable you are. But you've kind of bucked that mentality, and it sounds like you've not lacked for opportunity. So, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I would say you really got to find the people that need the right people at the right time. So timing is everything. And for me, I found that if you want to be a generalist, if you find like an early stage startup, Series A startup, Series B startup, those are the kinds of companies you want to probably aim toward because they need generalists.
Yeah, that's great. So, you mentioned one of the best things that you've seen in students is just being able to figure things out, and also being part of a startup where you're having to do a lot of things across probably a varied amount of fields. You're probably having to do that yourself. So how do you go about that for yourself? Like, what are the steps to problem solving something you've never seen before?
Yeah, it depends on the thing. Every day from like a creative standpoint or from a design standpoint, I'm working on something, anything from a range of sort of like production design to really heavy strategic thinking, and planning. And then in addition to that, for my job, there's a layer of sort of planning, projecting, like resourcing, administrative work, recruiting, like all the things. A lot of Googling, I would say, is helpful. Like if there's something I literally have never seen before, which happens all the time, and like I think it takes professional maturity to realize it. You Google it. You ask people that that do it or have done it or do it regularly. And then for me, I just kind of like to dive on in. Like even like I'll definitely be transparent. Like if it's something I do not feel comfortable with or is not something that you should have me do, I'll raise my hand. I think that's important too, to say, hey, like maybe we should get somebody who's done legal like legal work or something, because that is not my jurisdiction. But if it's something that I think is within reason of any reasonable, smart human, I would say I just dive in, figure it out, probably make mistakes along the way. And I'm forgiving to myself of making mistakes. And hopefully you found somebody to work for or people to work with that are also forgiving about mistakes you might make as you learn.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. We've talked about this idea of self-compassion a ton on the podcast, and I think it's so important for growth because there's no growth without risk. And it sounds like you haven't been afraid of that, like afraid of the failure, afraid to get fired, afraid to say, you know what, it's been 6 months, it's not working out, I'm okay if we move on. So how do you foster that in yourself? Like, how do you have that mindset of like, failure's fine as long as I'm moving forward?
It doesn't ever get easier, but you kind of become more used to it, I guess. Like there's definitely been jobs where I've worked for 6 to 8 months and I'm like, yeah, this isn't a fit. I'm sorry. And I hope it's okay. No hard feelings. Like, I'm sorry if I put you in a bad place. Yeah. I think again, like you just kind of learn over time. It's kind of like any relationship. Like if you're in a relationship with somebody, romantic relationship, we'll say, or even friendship of any kind, it takes a lot to be able to look the other person in the eyes and say, hey, like this is not working out. I think I've done that in my life enough to know when that moment happens with my career. And, when you're dealing with another person, when you're dealing with another company or partners or partnership, it's never going to be easy. But when you just kind of keep doing it, you realize the value and the importance of doing that. Because if anything, if you are feeling that way, it might be showing in your ability and your work, and it's probably better for the other party as well.
Let's talk a little bit about diversity in the workplace, because I know that this is, an important topic all the time, but it's definitely been highlighted in this season. What types of things have you done to make sure that diversity is fostered in the teams that you've built?
Yeah. Yep. One of the most important things, you can have a diverse team. You can have a diverse looking team or a diverse team on paper, but I think unless you really hear people and listen to what they have to say and allow them to be heard and be seen and project their voices, then it doesn't matter how diverse your team is. On paper, you really have to like go above and beyond to listen, hear, and see people, and project for them. Because I think diversity also is not just the way somebody might look or their religious beliefs or their gender identity, but it's also, things like age or, if somebody's more of an introvert, versus an extrovert, like their voice will not be heard, or if somebody just has a totally different communication style. And sometimes it might even be like an abrasive communication style. You want to foster, the ability for them to feel comfortable with projecting their own voice, even if, it can be challenging. So yeah, being heard and seen and creating space for that too, because I feel like I've definitely worked for people who speak a lot about diversity and then don't necessarily create the actual space and room to listen to people, to give them a voice. And you just gotta stop and listen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I think, like you mentioned, the root of it is needing to make the extra effort, because it's almost natural to say that the person is the best fit for this job is somebody who looks a lot like me or enjoys the same things that I do, and it almost like we talk a lot about the culture and making sure they're a right fit for the culture, which can almost be like code for you have to have the same exact values that I do. And so it takes that extra, like, let me find somebody that has maybe different values who I wouldn't necessarily be friends with, but would add a lot of value and a lot of perspective. So, how do you do that? And more importantly, how do you make sure you convey that upward, to people who you speak to or people who you're accountable to, as far as in the company that you're working for?
Yeah. Like, to go back to the sort of coast to coast airplane trip thing, for me, you know, a great coast to coast trip with somebody can be with somebody who you totally disagree with, but you have such a great conversation about that disagreement. And I think it's important to allow for those kinds of disagreements and discussions and like invite it. I know with my team right now, every Monday morning I meet with every one of them individually, and then midweek I check in, and at the end of the week we have kind of a powwow where we just kind of have updates, and then we have as much time as I possibly can create for open discussion. Like, what do you think about anything? What do you think about this? Please tell me your thoughts on this. And it takes a lot of extra effort and time, and slows down the process a little bit for sure. But I think for me, it's like you have to take those extra steps and make that effort, like we said, to in order for like the long term success. It's short term, slow. Long term, you align values. You hear people, you allow them to speak and listen, and then it just works. In order to the other question though, in terms of how to sort of manage that up, that's a lot harder. Like I'm learning that every day. I learn more about it every day. Managing vertically and communicating up and horizontally in all directions. Like it's challenging. Like you can. I'd say the best way to do it for me, I found, is to kind of lead by example. Your leadership style might be different than the person above you or the person to your right and left, and that's okay. I think the best way to sort of share those values with them is not necessarily by telling them what you're doing, not even asking if they would do it, but rather just doing it in your own lane, and then allowing them to see that what you're doing. I don't know if that's been successful or not, to be honest, but that's kind of my policy, because nobody likes to, be told anything. Nobody likes to, for you to like bring it up or flag up those kinds of things. But if you just lead by example, the proof's in the pudding, I guess you could say.
You mentioned diversity in personality, and even, hiring somebody that might have an abrasive style when you're more of a laid back person. And, I know I've struggled with that because I'm definitely more the direct person when it comes to pretty much everything in my life. And so I've had to learn how to temper that personally. But personality it can kind of be like a tool, and I think it's a lot more flexible than most of us think. And so we think that, okay, I've got one personality tool in my tool belt, and it's a hammer. And so if the situation doesn't call for a hammer, then I'm either going to make it call for a hammer or I'm going to leave. So how do you change that? How do you navigate and become flexible and learn from all of those things?
That's a great way to look at it. And what's funny is there are hammers and screwdrivers and tape guns and staple guns and coffee machines and water bottles. There's no personality types come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and categories. And even right now, when I think about my own team, there are some people that are more direct, able to kind of pick up and take projects and move, and then other people that are that slow down a bit, that are a lot more inquisitive and introspective and thoughtful, I would say, about what they do. And both of those, not that those are the only two in the world, but within that spectrum, they both kind of come with challenges. And what I like to do as a leader is to try to find the projects and opportunities for the right personality type. And it could be a project. It could also be, on this specific project, you're working with these XYZ stakeholders, and those stakeholders appreciate people that are more direct, or appreciate somebody who's more thoughtful, inquisitive, and curious about the way they approach things. So I try to do that. It's not a perfect science. Even myself, like I try to adapt as much as I possibly can. When I'm dealing with different types of people that respond differently to different, styles and personalities, and I'm not always successful for sure. But I like to think that, at least I'm putting in the effort to try to be.
I guess a piggyback question from that would be, how have you helped people on your team more or less hone their personality if it's something that is creating a lot of tension in the team, to help them, figure out how to work with people who are such opposites, despite having this one set of personality traits?
Yeah, that's a great question, I think. And my answer would be, and this is my latest answer, because I think it changes and has changed over the years, a shared group of values. So people can be all sorts of things, on the spectrum of, personality and ability and skill level. But if everybody has a shared set of values, they generally believe in the same things, and that's kind of what makes the team special and what makes the team work, then it works, And I'd say when I interview people, or when I'm talking to a potential partner, like a vendor even, I just want to make sure that they're aligned with my values, They give space to listen and hear and actually talk and have a conversation with people. It's okay if their personalities are different, if they come from a different place, if they come from a different, totally different world. But as long as they are like genuinely, good people and share what I share, then I think it'll be okay. Because you can't like teach values. They're already kind of taught. They like come as a package, Yeah. I mean, you can definitely like share your values with other folks, and they might disagree, but it's hard to sort of change that in somebody, because it's something you're sort of born with and develop over time, and that's okay. But it doesn't always work. It's like oil and water on a team or with a partnership.
Let's talk a little bit about the agency that you built yourself, because I think there's kind of this romanticized idea of being your own boss and writing your own schedule and being an entrepreneur, and so, I have certainly found that it's not awesome all the time. Like, most of the time there are nights where you're up late at night and you're not going to be able to sleep because something is going on within the company. So what ultimately led you to decide to move away from that?
I might move back. Caveat, like I might move back eventually, I think, to that. But I will say, like you said, there are nights you're up all night and, trying to make ends meet or figure out, solve a problem. And it's not easy, and it's not for everybody. What made me move back, I think, or away from that, I'd say, at least for now, is, I wanted to work with a larger team to kind of have a lot more sort of deeper project access, where, working within an agency structure, by the nature of what you do, they hire you to do one thing, for like a 6-month project. You're in and then you're out. You don't even get to necessarily see the project through. You don't even get to, help out and update it and iterate on it. And I was looking for that kind of ownership and that kind of ability. And also I wanted to surround myself with more people that had, kind of cross-functional abilities. My agency was like 5 people, and they're very talented people. But, after doing it for like 3 years, I was like, man, I kind of, maybe it's time to dip back into the world of many people and see what that's like. But I still, like I mentioned earlier, I still try to keep it pretty small, just so you can have, hopefully deeper relationships with people.
So for the designers who are just getting started, or developers, or whoever, what's the best advice that you can give them on their journey?
I would say get weird, try things that you didn't set out to try, like definitely have an idea in mind of who you are and where you generally want to go. But take that who you are bit, the value bit, and then apply it to different companies and situations that you might never have thought you'd land yourself in. Like, for example, you're a designer and you knew you wanted to work at a big agency, and then some strange opportunity just finds itself to you, and to work with a company that builds, coffins or something, I don't mean to get dark or morbid, but like, I don't know, man. Like, if it's interesting, the people are cool and the values are shared, try it. It's okay if you in 6 months are like, yeah, coffins really aren't my thing, but you might also find a place where your values and skills are heard, more than ever, because you chose a place that's so small and so niche and so, sort of weird. So just create room for just odd decisions and decisions that you might not have, thought you would make.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kyle, really appreciate you being on the Self-Made Web Designer podcast. If people are trying to connect with you, where would they go?
Where would they go? These days, probably, I guess, like, I'm not that really prolific on Instagram, I guess you could say. But you could hit me up on Instagram. My handle is Kyle Wai Lin, KYLEWAILIN. You can DM me, or you can email me. I'll put out my email address. My personal email address is KYLEWAILIN@gmail.com. Those are both great places. You can also find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on, so if you hit me up there, I can definitely get back to you.
Yeah, well, Kyle, thanks so much again. Hope to have you on again and maybe talk about the agency that you're going to start in a few years now. You never know.
Maybe you can join me on that, man. Like, I'm looking for, I would need new partners for that. And you got to find, I like diversity, and you are a supporter of diversity, and I can see that we've got shared values, man. So let me know when you're ready.
So awesome to hear Kyle's perspective on finding a job that you absolutely love in the tech field. And I love the idea that what you are doing or the amount of money that you're making is not nearly as important as the people that you are doing the work with, the relationships that you are building, whether or not you fit into the culture and would like to hang out with those people, even if you didn't work together at the same company. Such a great episode. Hey, I want to thank you again for being here. Next week, we've got another great guest, and it's going to be a fantastic episode. Are you staying up with me? Wednesday night at midnight, it is dropping, and it's going to be a ton of fun. So until then, have a great week, and don't forget, if you don't quit, you win.